Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. Today's guest made an appearance on Penny Arcade's Strip Search, the web series that was looking for basically the next top webcomic, and he was a finalist in that show. He's gone on to do several major blog appearances as far as being on the Popular Science blog. His name is Maki Naro, and he has probably drawn one of those comics you've seen floating around on the internet about vaccines. His work is really fan art for science, and I am proud to have him on the podcast. Thank you so much, Maki, for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So I guess let's just start off with how did you get into art? Was it when you were a kid, just starting out drawing, or was there influences early on?
Yeah, I think it was just one of those. Well, I had one of those stories where, as far back as I could remember, I was drawing. I think my earliest memories was, drawing stuff out of my mom's shopping magazine.
Was there anything that you gravitated towards, either I know for me as a kid, Calvin and Hobbes was always one of those comics that I always enjoyed, or Archie. Was there something that you gravitated towards when you first started drawing, or just you drew anything that you saw?
Calvin, at first it was just anything, but Calvin and Hobbes was definitely my biggest early influence. And I think that was the thing that got me wanting to make comics rather than, just drawing. Bill Watterson is a huge inspiration to me in general, and just the breadth of his skill set, his styles, and the things he would do in that comic always just blew me away, and that's what I wanted to be.
I know that my kids always they fight over we have just one of the Calvin and Hobbes books, and they love to fight over who gets to read it. And
that's awesome.
And then it's because I have three kids, they all gravitate towards different things, and my daughter just loves to draw. She just draws all the time, all sorts of stuff, and it always amazes me every day, what she's drawing today. Like today was a unicorn living in a rainbow land. So
great.
So you started off just drawing pretty much anything. As you got older, was there something that you just focused on drawing more so? I know I have friends that draw fantasy characters or sci-fi characters, and then that's kind of their niche.
I've kind of bounced around a lot. My drawing would always kind of follow whatever I was into at the time. So I remember a lot of my early comics were very, very derivative of Calvin and Hobbes, or even old cartoons like Wacky Races and some of those Hanna-Barbera things. I remember some early characters of mine basically just being rip-offs of various characters from there, taking a little quirk that a character had and being I'm going to give this character that. And then I remember in high school, I'd grown up with Japanese animation, but really got back into it during high school when a bunch of my other friends had, and so of course my style took a drastic turn towards that. And then in college I actually took a pretty big break from drawing. I still drew, but I went to art school, and I it was one of those kids in a candy store experiences where they had glass blowing and metal sculpture and video, and so I kind of tried a little bit of everything and ended up doing mostly ceramics and metal sculpture.
Wow, that's totally different than art.
Yeah. And for a while, I thought that's what I was going to do. I graduated with, a concentration in metal foundry and, some electronic media. I dabbled in animation a bit. But when I got out of school, studio spaces are expensive. So I ended up falling back on drawing and painting because that's something I could just do in my apartment. And so, that's kind of where I picked drawing back up. In high school, it's thankfully one of those things that has been completely lost to the internet, as far as I know. I believe it's probably one of those only things that has been completely lost to the internet. much to my appreciation, was I drew a comic about EverQuest.
Okay.
One of the early MMOs out there.
Right.
Probably one of the first ones, right? Like,
yeah, EverQuest
or I guess
was...
Ultima Online.
Yep, Ultima Online is the first one I could think of, and then EverQuest was like the one where everyone, except for me apparently, because I didn't ever play EverQuest.
I never got far in it. I think I only ever made it to level 20, and I couldn't figure out what to do after that. But yeah, so I had an EverQuest comic, in high school, that, like at one point I found it and like looked at it and I was just like, oh my god, this is terrible. But people seem to enjoy it. But thankfully it's not one of those things that, gets like sent to me every day. Like, hey, I found this early comic that you did when you were 16 and, I had really embarrassing views about, like relationships and romance and what that entails. I think that's what I remember the most about it was just like, Jesus, this was a really terrible romantic subplot.
So for those of you that are into EverQuest and terrible romantic subplots, try and find something that's been lost to the internet.
Yeah.
It's amazing how the internet just has grown and changed, even since like you were on Strip Search, because I was rewatching some of the episodes before I had you come on today, and it was so interesting. The dialogue, the latest episode that I watched was about the Twitter challenge, and the dialogue that that you and the other creators were having about how to use Twitter to engage, and how Twitter has evolved even from that time period to what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I should actually, that's a really good point. I should go back and watch that old one. The basis of the challenge I remember was, there was a couple kind of, nasty Twitter eggs basically before, the Twitter egg was a thing. And a lot of the challenge was how you deal with those. And, at the time I was very much a do not engage, unless there's some sort of like teaching moment to be had, that you're not going to like, I was very much like at that time I was, before Strip Search, I was doing, my first science comic. It was actually called Science.
Right.
Because I like to make things confusing. And I was very much in that, like, a lot of one of the things I stressed a lot was the idea that, like, like somebody who's like really like deeply entrenched in their ideas, they're not going to change their mind, and it's probably a waste of time to like try. And so like going into that challenge, that's kind of where I was.
Yeah, it's totally is almost like a blast from the past because of how Twitter has evolved with what we've seen, like with Gamergate, and even with our current president, and how Twitter's used like as a hammer. It's just interesting to have gone back to see where people were like with the engagement, and now there's so much more social media on top of just Twitter and like Facebook and Reddit and Tumblr and all sorts of things that I don't even know how to use, and I just find it so intriguing about like the engagement aspect and what people like. I know that there's like a big talk about like, oh, you used my snark, like you're using the snark to turn it back on them, and now it's almost like you wonder about if you should even bother engaging with people, because it could just open up such a firestorm of people like either piling on you or agreeing with you. Like it's very tentative. Like I approach Twitter very tentatively. Like if I'm going to say something, it's either positive or nothing at all.
Yeah, and like it's interesting you brought up the firestorm, because I was just thinking that there's definitely like, I definitely avoid that, and it definitely can go both ways, and like, it's been a long time actually. It's probably like, this probably isn't a good thing, but it's been a long time since I've had like a Twitter pile on about me, based on like something I drew. It's usually like kind of the metric I go for of like when I'm doing something that's like, socially relevant is when I get a bunch of angry like trolls and mentions. But I feel like, it can go the other way where you just end up with like, a bunch of people who agree with you, like piling on somebody. And I've actually like, gone after, not like gone after, but, mildly scolded celebrities before on Twitter because, they've, unaware that they were doing it, but, basically pointing their like million-person audience at a person, like a random, just somebody who had an opinion, and then, directing that pile on them. And so, like, as, like, my audience has grown, I don't know how successful I am, because sometimes you don't even, like, see the backlash.
Right.
But I try to be a little mindful of, like, who am I sending, 11,000 people at, or 1 million people, or 3 million, or however many people you have following you, most of which might be really nasty, depending on who you are.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned that your first, like, webcomic, besides the EverQuest webcomic, it was called Science.
Yes.
Like, how or why did you start doing a webcomic on science? Because you get of all sorts of webcomics, but something very science-based is kind of out of the norm for people.
Before I even realized it, science was always something that I enjoyed growing up. Before, like, when I was a kid, I think, like, my dream, like, career was I was either going to be a cartoonist or an entomologist.
Okay.
Because that's what I like to do. I like to draw, and I like to go out and catch bugs. So those were kind of my two things, and I, ended up going into the arts instead of the sciences. But it wasn't until, like, after college I started to realize how much I liked science as a thing, as a general topic, when I started listening to podcasts.
Okay.
People always point to This American Life as the kind of the gateway drug of podcasts. Somebody recommends you get really into it, you start seeing what other podcasts are out there, and next thing you know, you're like listening to like hours and hours a week. At least that was my experience anyway.
Right.
And a lot of what I fell back into was science podcasts, mostly because of, This American Life and then Radiolab, of course. And then I found the Nova podcast, and like, one of my, fondest memories growing up is that every week my dad and I would watch Nova on PBS every Wednesday night, I think it was. Maybe also because it was like one of the only times I got to stay up late as a kid. It was on at like 8 p.m. or whatever. But, yeah, and so like I saw Nova and I was like, oh, that's great. And of course then iTunes is like, hey, you might like this and you might like this. And next thing you know, I'm listening to Scientific American or the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and, just like inundating myself with science podcasts. And, I started to think like, oh wow, science is really great and I really like this, and this is something that like I'd love to like, get into. I guess it was really like kind of my first fandom, as far as my work goes. Although it didn't really hit me until 2010, where I was kind of struggling artistically, and I was working a job with a lot of hours, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I don't make art anymore. I'm I'm so bummed out, and, I feel like a failure. And then I met a singer-songwriter who I, really admire, this guy, George Robb, who sings songs about science. And he was doing like a CD signing in New York, and I went and saw him and like said hey and like talked to him for a bit, and I just realized like, oh, like this guy puts together two things that he loves. Like, why don't I just do that? And so I just decided to start drawing comics about science.
When you did the comics about science, how much research did you have to do before you even started drawing? Because you cover some serious topics.
A ton, and I feel like some of it was still not enough. My greatest fear is that, like, I'm, shooting off the cuff about a subject and I end up getting it completely wrong. And I have gotten it completely wrong. And thankfully, I've had some, like, really great scientists, like, connect with me to say, like, hey, I saw your comic. That was really cool, but... And, like, I had some great experiences from that. One of the early ones was I drew a comic based on a Neil deGrasse Tyson quote about why the moon looks bigger when it's closer to the horizon versus up in the sky. And, like, he had said something about that, and I included it in a comic. And Phil Plait got in touch, and he was like, well, Neil's not really that right. And we talked to it for a while, and so I made a big comic about, like, the actual reason, the actual reason is actually really cool. It's rather than, like, like reference objects and the horizon lines. It's more about that, it's more of an optical illusion. I know I'm getting this wrong. I always mix it up with Ponzi schemes because it's similar, but I think it's the Ponzo illusion. That thing where you have like two shapes that are the same size and, two kind of lines that are converging. And because of that, like, convergence of lines, one of the circles looks bigger than the other because those lines create like a false perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So you think that the one that seems farther away is bigger, even though they're the same size. And the moon is kind of the same thing based on like how we perceive the sky above us. But it's really a lot more complicated. And I'm realizing now, I'm like, geez, this is really hard to explain with just text.
Yeah, or just talking. Yeah. I know
probably
that
another reason why I love to do comics about science, because it really gets that visual in there.
Right, and that's one of the things that I loved about your science series, the stuff that you've done, is that it really makes it a lot easier to understand some of those concepts in science. And I could point my friends to it, or people that, maybe aren't understanding certain topics, and I'm just going to pull out the one that's been seen by a lot of people about vaccines. And, people might not understand it, and I have relatives where they just don't get it, and they're still on that blaming vaccines for autism kick, and showing them the webcomic is a lot easier than trying to have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah, it really, like, getting that visual, and also just kind of like, approaching some subjects from a more like, more of a layperson's point of view, like, helps a lot in that, and kind of like connecting with somebody. And again, sometimes the comic doesn't work, and like I've definitely had a lot of hate mail about that one.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of people who are just kind of like, oh, I don't know, and I hear these things on each side, like, that thing a comic can really help a lot.
So you did the science comic, or Sci-N. I think I read that you were doing it as the Sci-ENCA or ENCE.
Yeah. I did it because for some reason science.org was taken, and science.com was taken too. Like I don't know, I didn't expect that. But yeah, originally it was kind of styled in like a dictionary, like how you would read it in the dictionary,
mm-hmm.
complete with like the upside down E, which I kind of made the logo. But yeah, it was funny at the time, but in the end everybody would be like, I really love your comic, Sci and I'd be like, no, it's just science. It's funny because it's a science comic called Science. And anyway, but yeah, so when I moved to Popular Science later after Strip Search, I took the chance to kind of rebrand it into Boxplot.
Right. I read that I think on the website, and I was like, yeah, I could see how that was mistaken a lot. And then you're telling people about the comic, but then they can't find it when they're searching like Google or Yahoo or whatever, looking for it. They just can't find it. I could see that being an issue.
Yeah, there were a lot of issues with that. Especially like, and I feel like I still do things this way, but I was still, I hadn't drawn a webcomic since I was in high school, drawing a comic about EverQuest.
Mm-hmm.
And so like my next immediate webcomic project is, jumping into this big thing, and like kind of just going about it like I still felt like I was new to the whole like internet comic thing, where like people have been drawing webcomics since the 90s, the early 90s, when they first started to take off. Had all that stuff down, like, oh gee, maybe your comic name should pass the radio test, and maybe it should be something that's easy to find.
I don't know how many people were following your work pre-Strip Search, but how did you find out about Strip Search to begin with? Because I know that it was part of the Penny Arcade Kickstarter. They were raising the money to go ad-free, right. And then after a certain part, they had like the extra, what people, when you reach that point, and then there's more, the stretch goals.
Yeah.
And part of that was doing the Strip Search show. How did you find out about that, to enter in to be one of the contestants.
And another instance of bad planning. I remember reading about it when they announced the Kickstarter and seeing the stretch goals, and kind of seeing that like, oh, a reality show about comics or something. And I remember not thinking anything of it. Like I just like skimmed past. I kept reading, like not even like realizing like, oh, this could be like a big opportunity for me. And it wasn't until later when a friend of mine like passed it on, and he was like, hey, you should do this, you dummy, like. And so I did. I applied, and it was really wild that I got in, and it was like one of the weirdest, most surreal times of my life, because I remember being at work and like, getting the email that's like, hey, you made it to the next round. We need you to like do this survey now, and getting to the next part, and then finally like coming in one morning to a big old NDA and saying like, hey, you've been chosen. Don't tell anybody yet, or we'll sue you for a lot of money. But yeah, it was really wild and really exciting.
What was the application process like? Was it just initially like submit some artwork and then fill out like a questionnaire, or was there more to it?
It was interesting. Yeah, the initial is just like, who are you? What's your website? Like, how can we find you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember after, there was a longer survey at one point, and I remember they one of the parts was they had an empty penny arcade comic, and we had to fill in the word balloons.
Okay.
I wish I could remember what I did. I'm gonna have to like try to find that sometime. And then there was like a video portion at one point, which is actually the step that I thought I bombed. Like I was sure that I was out because I had this like massive head cold. There was like a parade happening outside, and I was just sitting in there like...
The confluence of like bad things happening.
Yeah, and I'm like terrible with video, so I'm like sitting in like kind of a dark... I'm sitting in my bedroom in the dark with just a wall behind me, like, like, hey, I'm Maki Naro, and I have a really bad cold. And trying to tell a joke. Like, that was one of the things was you had to, like, tell a joke, and, God, it was, like, really bad, and I sent it in, I was, like, so sick, I was like, whatever, I don't even care anymore, I'm gonna die. And I sent it in, and so, like, I'm really happy that they looked past that. Especially after seeing some of the others. I think they're on the DVD, if you ever want to check them out, some of the special features. But, like, Nick's was, like, super slick. Like, you should definitely look for his if you can.
Okay.
Like, I saw it later, and I was like, oh my god, this is, like, like, music video production quality.
So, you get in, and then you're in Seattle for about 2 weeks, give or take?
2 weeks, yep.
How was that? Because, for every day, it's, I believe it's like 3 episodes. There's
right.
the episode, and then there's the challenge, and then there's the elimination.
Right.
So it's a great expansion of time. It's about an hour, I think it's about an hour for like that one day that we're watching, but for you it's 2 weeks. How was that time period? I mean, it's like you're cut off from everything pretty much from what they said. There's no TV, there's no
right.
Communications with the outside world. So it's just you and the other creators, the other artists that are there. What was your experience like?
I mean, yeah, it was really whirlwind, and it was scary and exciting and terrifying. I feel like terror was probably my like number one emotion. Because you'd like wake up in the morning and you'd just be like, oh god, what are we gonna do? Is this my day? Is this the day I'm out? And then you do the challenges and you're like, oh god, I did terrible. Is this the day I'm out? And then like you're not picked and you're like, whew, breath of relief. And then they kind of, shut down. They move production over to the elimination stage.
Mm-hmm.
That stage where they were doing the draw off, while the rest of us are just kind of hanging out in the house, eating junk food and like doodling and actually getting time to like talk to each other.
Right. Without the cameras around her.
Yeah, exactly. They had cameras. There was cameras all through the house. And they had one guy with a camera there, and he like recorded a whole bunch of stuff, but they didn't end up using really any of it. I think like the GoPros that they set up around, where it was just like too hard to hear and like too dim, and they opted not to really use any of that extra stuff.
What was it like with all the different challenges? Was there one that was like harder than the others that you had, or was there one that you felt was geared more towards your style?
I feel like I bombed on all of them. Like, completely honest. Every single one that came up, I was like, oh my god, this is the thing I'm the worst at. And even the ones that I thought I was going to nail, like, I didn't do so great. Like, of course, there was the first one that I went up for elimination for, the booth setup, which, I just set myself up for defeat when they're like, who's set up a booth before? And, like, I had done, like, one convention. I'd done one convention.
Right.
And I raised my hand, like, I'm like, yeah, I know how to do this. I got this. I did not have it at all. And then, like, all the morning challenges were pretty fun. So even if, like, I did bad, it wasn't anything, like, I had to worry about too much. Like, the go-kart challenge, like, I am not good at driving go-karts. Like, I'm not even good at, like, driving cars. Let alone this, like, little thing that, like, you kind of have to really take advantage of its, low center of gravity to, like, drift into those turns. And, like, I can't even, like, drift in a video game. So that was trouble.
I could never do that in Mario Kart, no matter how hard I tried.
I had no idea. I was terrible at Mario Kart. Like, I'm not going to be good at the real thing. But I was generally like, I went into every challenge like, oh my god. I think like the one I felt the best about was the Magic the Gathering one.
Right.
So I kind of like, like they told us we could bring whatever art supplies we wanted. So I brought a ton of stuff, not realizing that like, it wasn't until that point we ever got to use them. So I was just happy to like break out a bunch of like gouache paints and like just like do something like relaxing and fun, and it ended up being like really good, except I missed like the one line about the color scheme. One of those devil in the detail moments that always seems to get me.
Right.
Now everybody who sees that show knows I'm lying when I say how detail oriented I am on my resume. I'll never be hired again. That one was a lot of fun, and I know for a fact that painting is hanging up somewhere in the Magic offices.
That's awesome. And you made it to the end.
Somehow, yeah.
Somehow, because when they do all the introductions, and then there's the talk, and I think it was when they're talking, they're like, Erica entered in, and I can't remember who it was like, I can't believe that this person who I'm reading their webcomic is here, like a professional is here. And it kind of sets that stage for at least the viewer. And for me was like, oh, Erica's definitely going to be one of those people at the end. And you see their work and you see everything. And then Erica's eliminated. And I think Erica was eliminated almost like at that halfway point or a little bit past the halfway point. And like, wow, this is really kind of flipped the expectations of who's going on. And like the three finalists, yourself, Abby, and Katie, I know as a viewer I didn't expect Abby to get to that point because of the conversations in the studio about Abby's that tangent that they kept bringing up repeatedly. They're like, I'm staring at the tangent. The tangent's keeping me awake at night. And I'm like, oh, Abby's never going to get to the final. Like, once she gets to that portion of, like, having to compete to save herself, basically, that art off. But, yeah, it ended up being you, Abby, and Katie.
Yeah, and, like, Abby was definitely, like, the dark horse of the competition in that sense, because, like, her drawings are really, you see them, and it's really, they're not bad. Like, they're not bad. I I didn't even honestly I didn't even know what a tangent was until that episode. So like I cannot say anything about Abby's art, and especially it wasn't until I forget if she had gone to one when. I remember there being a specific point, because the problem of us not, when you're watching the show, you get to see everything.
Right.
But, when we were on the show, we don't get to see. We just see that someone comes back. And we don't see that, oh, I wonder what they did, or, what comic they did. And I remember the point where I saw the comic that Abby won in one of her eliminations on, and I was just like, oh my god, she's really, really good.
Right, because up until that point, you the audience member, we don't see. I mean, we see the challenge artwork, but we don't get to see how someone would actually do the art until that art off. Right,
and when Mike went on that famous tirade, he was just going off of that, that cardboard cutout that we all went in. Not knowing that Abby had razor sharp wit, and it's just intrinsically super hilarious.
Right. How was it, before we get to the end, what was it like waiting for the person to come back through the door? Because I know that it looks like everyone's up kind of ready to go to sleep, but because everyone's in the pajamas, and then someone comes through that door, it just looks like you guys are all exhausted from the day.
Yeah, I mean that was very real exhaustion, and I don't remember if it was the first day, but yeah, we were often in our pajamas because they'd be filming so late. Mm-hmm. And I remember one day they told us to go to sleep, and they would wake us up when they got back. And so they actually came back in the middle of the night. I don't remember how late it was, and it was only one day. They ran into some, production delays, but
okay.
Yeah, it was just so we were ready for bed, and, they would get a call and be like, okay, they're on their way back now. And so we would film that scene and just go upstairs.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was always kind of, just the usual. I remember we'd sit around and kind of talk about who we thought would have it and why, and who we were rooting for, and it was always, I'm trying to think, I don't think I think I was always surprised when the person would walk through. And I feel like that was one of the great things about the competition, was that, everybody had, some tricks up their sleeve, or, a skill you didn't know about, or, the judges would throw it completely to the wind when the next he came back.
That was definitely something. And I know, after the first 2 nominations where Katie went in twice, is oh gosh, is it going to be one of those things where it's always going to be Katie? Someone's just going to be putting Katie in. And I know someone referenced oh, if you need someone taken out, you just put them in with Katie, and Katie will come back. And that was always the thing that I enjoyed getting to watch about Strip Search, because I love Survivor, and I love The Amazing Race and Big Brother and those kinds of shows, and I liked how with Strip Search and with all of you, the contestants, I enjoyed that there wasn't really any of that plotting or stabbing others in the back. You guys hated to have to put somebody up, and you guys were just there to art, basically, to do your artwork and just compete for that chance.
Yeah. Yeah, and it definitely I feel by the end of the third day, we had realized that that's the kind of show it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Going into the show, because I'd only known, reality shows like Survivor and more the cutthroat shows, I went into the show thinking oh god, this could be this could very well be the end of my career too. I could go on here, get angry at somebody and act like a jerk, and just that'll be me for the rest of my life. Oh yeah, Maki, that guy was a big jerk, a big baby on Strip Search. And I was prepared for that. I was this is a risk I have to take. But it was pretty clear, early on, we were all just I remember we were all sitting around and, saying wow, this is a really cool show. This is a really positive show. They're not out to destroy anybody's careers or anything.
Right.
We're all like getting along really well, and I always wonder if it would go differently if we had been there longer. You know, if it was like, if we had been like there for a month or something and gotten like really sick of each other. I would have loved to see how things would have been different. And maybe they wouldn't have been, but it's part of something I wonder about, just because it was really fast. It was like, it's like, hello, nice to meet you. Oh God, we're like competing now, and then it's over.
And then you just go back to your life before that, really. So you're one of the final 3 competitors, and your last task is to create a webcomic. And you did, and you created, I believe it's called Sufficiently Remarkable is what you ended up with.
Yes.
How did you come up with that concept? Because, I mean, coming up with a webcomic in and of itself is something that I as just a normal person, I can't fathom coming up with something like that. So how did you settle on that idea, that topic?
You know, I remember kind of like laboring over it for a long time, and I don't remember the exact moment when it came up, but I think I just wanted to do something really different for me. You know, I wanted to just do something really like story-based, character-based, you know, something a little more linear and just something different. And in many ways, it kind of, for the competition, I felt like it kind of, you know, it kind of bit me in the butt. Because it wasn't, I get the sense it wasn't quite something what they were looking for. You know, I think like they were very much looking for a gag strip, and like I had done the complete opposite. Like I actually like that challenge was really difficult because I, you know, I had like done these like stories and stuff, and like I just like realized it's like, you know, like this doesn't work as a gag strip at all. And like the more that the gag strip, you know, the less it works. And like my favorite comics from the series since then have been like the ones that, you know, were more introspective and more about the characters and the story than about like any joke or anything like that. You know, it has its moments, but my favorites are always kind of like that first comic I did with Reedy and her dad on the beach is like still one of my very favorites, and that's the comic I always kind of look back towards when I think like when I need to like realign the shift of the strip.
So you don't come out on top with Strip Search, and Katie's the winner. I think she had the Camp We Don't Want You. If I'm, and I remember reading and following her for a while after. What happens after Strip Search? The show is over. You go back to New York, and I think at that point you like. Is when you and Popular Science got together, but that was in the works beforehand.
Yeah, that had been in the works for actually like a couple of, I mean, like from the very beginning when my editor, Dave Mosher, like when he was at Wired, he kind of was like, hey, I want to like start a blog network and I want your comics to be part of it. Like, you know, just kind of as this like, you know, offhand remark after an event. You know, it'd been a couple of years in the works. And he had moved to Popular Science and started it up there, and then like they were redesigning their website, and so like we were waiting for like the website to be done for the launch. So yeah, it ended up launching in October of that year after Strip Search. So like it was kind of one of the things where like, yeah, when I was on Strip Search, I had already signed the contract and everything.
Okay.
But it ended up taking like that much longer. Like I remember on the show mentioning it, like yeah, I just signed a deal with Popular Science doing a blog, and then like a year later. So, yeah. But yeah, so, and that was super exciting, and sadly did not last as long as I would have liked. This just 2 years afterwards, you know, this past October, they decided to shut down all the blogs. No real idea why. You know, it's just like we all got a letter from our editor being like, hey, they're gonna stop, you know, running these things after the end of October. Really sorry. And then like there was just like nothing after that. Like, you know, we thought like the editor-in-chief was going to make like some sort of announcement about it, but then at the last minute decided not to, so it just kind of like fell off.
Okay.
It was kind of really rough for me. Like I'm still kind of trying to recover from that, because in many ways, like being at Popular Science was kind of a big validation like, for me. And, like, I felt like, you know, that was the point where I was like, oh, wow, I'm on the right track. I'm somebody. I'm, like, doing something really cool that people appreciate. Like,
Right.
it felt good. And it felt good having that kind of clout, too. Like, whenever I do, like, some of my more, like, social justice work, or just, like, you know, talking about the art industry, of, you know, having that, like, platform to speak from really helped a lot.
Right.
And just, like, also just from, like, just as a matter of pride, being able to go home and being like, yeah, like, you know, Popular Science, you know, like one of the oldest magazines in the Americas. You know, yeah, I have a blog on their site. It's pretty cool. So yeah, so it's after that I built up a new box plot site, but you know, I've been pretty slow on updating it. You know, like anytime I get ideas, I usually go to the Nib, which is another website for mostly political cartoons, but also comic journalism. So I do a lot of work for them now.
Okay. So you're on the Nib, and you're working on, like, the box plot stuff, like you mentioned. And Sufficiently Remarkable is still going on at this point? Because
it is back. There was a hiatus, because I'm always trying to figure out what to do with the strip. And so there was, like, a point where, like, I thought I had found a groove and I wasn't quite liking it. And then, like, you know, the pop sci thing happened, and then the election happened, and I was just kind of like, oh, I need a break.
Yeah.
But it is back, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. It's a lot more. I feel like it's you know, I feel like I'm making the compromises in the right places now. Like, I can, you know, the format is a bit more flexible, and I could go back to doing color, which I liked.
I have to ask a question, because I'm looking at some of your stuff that's for sale on the shop, and I just want to ask, is Pluto a planet?
No, it is not a planet. It is a dwarf planet.
Are you sad that it has been downgraded to being dwarf planet status? Like, because
really.
I think we're right about the same age. You know, we grew up as Pluto being a planet.
But, like, I don't know. I was never that invested.
You were never invested in the status of Pluto.
I could see if it was, like, Pluto happened to be, like, my favorite planet. But, like, until, like, you know, until last year, Pluto was just, like, this weird brown dot. You know,
right.
This, like, fuzzy, you know, color if we were lucky, like, fuzzy orb with another fuzzy blob next to it. And occasionally they'd find some extra fuzzy blobs around it. You know,
right.
We're finding a new moon around Pluto every time. And so, yeah, I think, like, I was never that, like, into Pluto, so I wasn't too bothered by it.
Okay.
You know, I completely understand why it was demoted, if you even want to call it a demotion, because some of the dwarf planets out there are more interesting than some of the actual planets, especially as far as Pluto's concerned. You know, it kind of works because they're all in the same kind. You know, like, you look at some of the planets and what they have going for them, and then you look at Pluto, and it's just kind of, you know, you're not as crappy as the moon, but still pretty cool. You know, you're still pretty small, and, you know, of questionable planetary validity. You've got your weird orbit, and, you know, we don't even know who's orbiting who in the Pluto-Charon situation. You know, I'm sure this is the part where I'm, like, gonna look it up later and be like, God damn it, I was talking out my ass again.
Expect a call from Neil deGrasse.
Yeah, I'd probably be more angry if they promoted the moon to a planet, because, you know, I'm invested in the other direction against our heavenly satellite.
Right.
I think compared to all the other moons in the solar system, our moon is a piece of crap. Like, it's got nothing. There's reasons we've never gone back. Who wants to visit that thing?
Who wants to visit the moon when we could go to Mars? Like,
right? It doesn't even have active volcanism like some of the other moons out there. Like, can't even hold an atmosphere. Forget it.
The podcast is generally about fandoms, and I'd love to know if there's something that you're just into that you would recommend to anybody. Like, the first thing that pops into your head if somebody's looking for something to, like, watch or read or check out. What's something that's always on your list of things that you would recommend to somebody?
It's funny, like, going into this, I was like, oh no, like, I don't really have that many, like, fandoms, and then I remembered, yes, I'm the guy who says that he draws fan art for science, I don't know, I can't think of anything. But as far as as far as other fandoms go, like, I'm kind of spread out all over the place. Like, I love video games. I love anime. I like, like sci-fi, fantasy. Like, there's like little bits and pieces sprinkled everywhere. For video games, I immediately think of Overwatch, which is like the game that I'm the biggest fan of that I don't play. I played it a lot when it came out, and then, like, I don't know, it's something with the competitive nature of it and the kind of the internet the gaming community and kind of the nasty people you could run into. Like, I kind of burnt myself out really fast. So, like, I love, like, all the art and the fan art and the stories, and I love what they're doing with the game in general. Just, like, every character that comes out, you're just like, well, they can't outdo this one, and then, and they always do, and they're always doing really great stuff with it, and the cast is amazing, but, like, like, I haven't played in months.
Right.
I just absorb all the other stuff built up around it.
Right, like the videos and I know that they have like comics coming out about it and stories that's published.
Oh yeah, the comics are beautiful, and like, yeah, the little cutscenes, like, I remember, like, what turned me on to it was, like, all the little, like, cutscenes and movies that they released, kind of featuring all the characters. And just watching, you're like, oh, these are all really cool. And of course, like, it's Blizzard, so, like, of course, all the the cutscenes are going to be great. Right.
I was talking to somebody, or I was listening to somebody's podcast, and they had brought up World of Warcraft offhand, and they were like, it's just so hard to believe that there was a game before World of Warcraft that was just called Warcraft. and I remember playing Warcraft when it came out and thinking how great that game was, and I'm like, how do people not remember that? But I mean, I'm from that generation that grew up with, like, Warcraft and XCOM and those kinds of games, and now they're all being remade and people are like, this is great. And I'm like, yeah, but there was stuff before it.
I never played Warcraft. I got into the franchise with Warcraft 2. Okay. I remember being really into that, and, like, especially because of, like, all the, Chris Metzen and Samwise's artwork in the instruction manual. Like, like, man, I remember as a kid,
back
like,
when they had instruction manuals.
Yeah, when I was a kid, like, I would just, like, I had the instruction manuals on my bookshelf, and I would just, like, read them now and then, because they were so much more robust, than now, where they don't exist. But, especially the Warcraft ones, they had all that art in there. So yeah, as a budding artist, I was always looking at those, and I was really into Warcraft 2. Warcraft 3, not so much. And I remember World of Warcraft. I never
played Warcraft 3.
I think, like, it was, it was during that time where, like, Warcraft 2, like, all the units were, like, really well, like, rendered and stuff, and so, like, Warcraft 3 kind of came in that period where, like, everybody is just, like, a collection of blocks. And
right.
I felt like...
And you had your hero character. Like, I think they had that hero-ish thing where you had, like, your main hero, plus then you had, like, the little people around you.
Exactly. And then when World of Warcraft came out, I remember playing, like, the beta a little bit, but I didn't start back up again until after college. That was, like, a requirement, because I remember being in college and knowing this guy and just, like, seeing less and less of him, and then, like, one day asking, and he's like, yeah, he just started playing a lot of World of Warcraft, and then he dropped out. And I just remember being like, okay, I'm not touching this game until after I graduate. But to this day, I still play a fair bit of it. I've been, on and off for a while, but I like it because, like, I could log in, just do my thing. It's a lot more relaxing than Overwatch was. I think that was the big thing, is that Overwatch, I'd get in there and my heart would be racing, and I'd be angry, or, just way too amped up. And it's like, at the end of the day, I just want to, like, zone out. Play something. And, occasionally have some, like, team-based, challenge stuff, but yeah, Overwatch was a little too much for me.
And I guess the last question that I have is there are you with all the artists that were on the strip search, are you guys all still connected and talking to each other? I know that you hear about the people that were on like The Real World or Road Rules or Survivor, and they have like that sense of like they're all a family. It's a shared experience. Only you guys know what you went through. Are you still in contact with everybody that was on strip search? Do you guys still like talk to each other or hang out or go see each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's been harder for me because I'm so geographically separated. But it's always great to see everyone at, the various conventions we do get to. Especially like Abby's on the East Coast again now. So I just saw her at MICE in Boston this past fall, and that was really great because I haven't been able to like make it out to Seattle in a long time,
Right.
just for financial reasons. But yeah, and like in the beginning, like when we'd all be in like a Google Hangout, like like every night at one point, just like drawing and talking and hanging out. But like as we start doing our different things and schedules start diverging, that stops. But I know I know like probably all the all of them and all the ones that moved to Seattle like immediately after the show. I know they still like all talk and stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it very much is a family. And I'm just remembering now, and when you were talking about like what it was like, waiting at the house for somebody to come back, was my other favorite part about the show, which sadly was something I never got to take part in. Sad and like not sad. But was that, while we were waiting at the house for the winner to come back, there was like the shadow group at the hotel, waiting for whoever lost the challenge to come back. To come join them at the hotel, like all the people who had voted off, because, for the logistics of a reality show, when somebody's voted off the island, they don't actually like go, they say like pack your bags, you're going home.
Right.
For many reasons, they don't actually go home. They get sequestered somewhere to make sure that like, until the show actually airs, nobody knows who got voted off first and whatnot. So, with Strip Search, when you were off the show, you just went back to the hotel that they had put us up in when we first got to Seattle. So like they would like wait in the hotel lobby for the person who had lost the challenge and had like a very similar situation of like welcoming that person back. And I thought that was really like a really nice thing. And like, there was that like sense of like that camaraderie of like the hotel group and the house group happening all at the same time. Like no matter what, we were all hanging out and we were all having fun. And it was just a really beautiful experience.
Right. For those who have listened to this podcast and they're interested in finding you online, what's the best places for them to do that?
Well, you can look at my portfolio at makinaro.com. I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Maki, M-A-K-I. I greatly appreciate all my Patreon folks, and it's become sort of, my blog where I'll post, like, works in progress and things. And in a lot of ways, like, it's a lot more fun because I'll post things that I don't feel comfortable, like, spreading out to the entire internet at first. So there's a lot of great, like, process posts and sketches, and, when I can get to it, I'll do, like, warm-ups in the morning and post some, like, paintings and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to that, Sufficiently Remarkable is at sufficientlyremarkable.com, and my science comics are at boxplot.com.
And you're also on Twitter.
I am on Twitter all the time. Too much.
All the time.
Too much Twitter. And I'm Science Comic on Twitter.
Science Comic.
Not to be confused with Science Comedian, who is also a very great guy, but there's been a couple of situations where we've been mixed up.
And you post a lot of really cool stuff at Science Comic on Twitter. Like that's probably the one place where I'm following you the most, is just watching what you're either tweeting or retweeting.
Oh yeah, and like I have to say, if you decide to follow me there, it swings pretty wildly. Like one minute I'm angry about something happening in politics and the world at large, and then the next minute I'm like, look at this giraffe. Look at this, or like
or my favorites is usually when it's something really cool science related. Like, look at this little, one-celled organism slurping up this other unicellular bacteria up like spaghetti. Like, where does it go? It's just gone now. Look at this other
I saw that.
Look at this other one-celled organism that's more agile and faster than I am.
Yeah, I saw that on the Twitter. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I think you had said it's doing it better than you do it. Oh my goodness. Well, Maki, I have to say, it's been an honor just getting to talk to you, because I think I said it off the podcast before we started, but when I was watching, you were my favorite contestant on Strip Search. The Pineapple Maki was one of those things where I was like, dang, I wish I could have one of those. And it's just been a joy. Like, I've been following you for as long as I think Strip Search was out, and everyone had the Twitter handles underneath. And I remember you being one of the first people I was following when I actually got on Twitter, because I was against it for a long time. I was like, but I like following the people that post really funny things or really insightful things on there. So it's been my pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Oh,
I greatly appreciate you taking your time out to just record with me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.